The first light of dawn painted the dry plains of Etosha National Park, Namibia, in muted gold, revealing the silhouette of an aging lion limping across the landscape. Once the undisputed ruler of his pride, the great lion, now named Kumo, had seen his strength wane with the passing years. Time had taken its toll. His once thick and regal mane now hung in ragged clumps, his body thinned by age and hunger. His roars, once enough to command an entire territory, were now hoarse echoes of former glory. Weeks earlier, a group of younger males had risen to challenge him. The fight was brutal. Kumo held his ground as long as his body allowed, but the vicious attacks left deep bite marks across his leg and neck. Blood had matted into his fur. Unable to defend his title or territory, he was forced to flee, a wounded monarch exiled from his own kingdom. Now, injured and disoriented, Kumo wandered aimlessly along the dusty border of the park. Each step sent pain shooting through his torn leg. The heat was relentless and his vision blurred with thirst and fatigue. With no strength left to hunt, hunger gnawed at him like a second predator. He followed the scent of human settlements, something he had never dared to do in his prime. But this was no longer a matter of pride, it was survival. As the sun climbed higher, the former king stumbled closer to a place unknown, hoping for anything, even mercy. Not far from the park's edge, nestled between dry shrubs and thorny trees, stood a modest wooden cottage, the quiet home of Mrs. Elna, a 72-year-old woman who had spent her earlier years working as a conservationist at Etosha National Park. Retirement hadn't taken her far from the world she loved. Instead of leaving nature behind, she chose to live in its gentle shadow, near the animals she once helped protect. That evening, just as the amber light of sunset melted into darkness, Elna heard something strange. A low, raspy sound, barely louder than a whisper, drifting in with the wind. She stepped carefully to her front door and opened it. Her heart skipped. There, just a few feet from her porch, lay a massive old lion collapsed on its side. His chest rose and fell in ragged breaths. Dirt and dried blood clung to his golden fur, and his leg was grotesquely swollen. His mane, graying and tangled, fluttered slightly in the breeze. But there was no fury in his eyes, no warning growl. Only a dull, exhausted gaze and the softest whimper, a cry that sounded less like a beast and more like a plea. Elna stood frozen. Her instincts screamed caution, but her heart ached for the broken king before her. Despite the danger, something about the lion's frail form stirred a deep compassion inside her. He didn't come to conquer. He came because he had nowhere else to go. And in that moment, the wild and the human world crossed paths, not in fear but in fragile trust. Mrs. Elna's hands trembled as she closed the door behind her, heart pounding in her chest. She paced the room once, then stopped at the dusty cabinet that held her old field kit, a rusted tin box from her conservation days. Her mind flashed with warnings, but her conscience whispered louder. You can't let him die out there. With shaking fingers, she grabbed a roll of gauze, a bottle of antiseptic, some clean cloth, and a bowl of warm water. Every step back to the porch felt heavier. The lion, Kumo she later came to call him, hadn't moved. His ribs rose and fell slowly, and one eye opened halfway as she approached. I'm not here to hurt you, Elna whispered. Her voice cracked as if unused to kindness. She knelt a cautious distance from him, inching closer until she could see the raw, open wound on his leg. The bite mark was deep, crusted with dried blood and dirt. Swollen. Infected. She soaked a cloth and reached forward. Kumo flinched, a low groan rumbling from his chest, but he didn't lash out. His body stayed still as though he understood. Tears welled in Elna's eyes as she pressed the cloth gently against the wound. Don't be afraid. I'm going to help you, she murmured, her voice breaking with emotion. Each motion, cleaning the gash on his leg, dabbing the torn skin near his neck, was clumsy but careful, performed with hands that had once tended creatures much smaller, but never one so wounded and proud. Kumo lay still, his breathing shallow but steady. For a moment, predator and human met in a silent bond, not of fear but of fragile trust, built on pain and compassion. As dusk fell over the quiet edges of Etosha, Mrs. Elna stood by her front porch, her phone pressed tightly to her ear. Her voice trembled as she gave the coordinates to the wildlife rescue team. He's hurt. Badly. Please, hurry. The old lion, now resting beside her, was silent, his breath shallow. She'd done all she could, now it was up to those better equipped to save him. 30 minutes later, the distant hum of an engine pierced the stillness. A truck rumbled into view, headlights sweeping over the dry earth like searchlights. Elna shielded her eyes and stepped aside as two conservationists emerged with a large iron transport cage and a tranquilizer gun. Seeing the team approach, Kumo stirred, lifting his head weakly. The flashlight's beam made him flinch and he let out a soft growl, not out of aggression but fear. Elna placed a gentle hand on his back. "It's okay, old boy. You're safe now." The vet administered a mild tranquilizer, just enough to sedate him for the journey. Kumo resisted briefly, a weak struggle that faded within seconds. As they began to load his heavy frame into the cage, Elna's chest tightened. She reached out, brushing her hand gently along his coarse mane through the bars. Just before the door clanged shut, Kumo's cloudy eyes fluttered open one last time. They locked onto hers, tired, grateful, familiar. In that single glance, Elna felt it. A wordless thank you from a once great king brought low by age and fate, now given another chance. She stood in the growing darkness, hands clasped at her chest, watching the truck disappear into the wild. "Hold on," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "You're not done yet." 1 week later, Mrs. Elna could no longer bear the waiting. Her heart had been restless each day since the truck had rolled away into the dusk, carrying Kumo with it. Early that morning, she packed a small bag of apples and dried meat for the rangers, then drove herself across the familiar winding road leading to the Etosha Wildlife Rehabilitation Station. The sun beat gently over the land, casting golden warmth on the tall acacia trees as she arrived. The staff greeted her kindly, clearly remembering the elderly woman who had dared to tend to a lion with nothing but instinct and courage. "He's doing better," one said with a smile, leading her to a secure, open-air enclosure at the rear of the facility. There he was. Kumo stood under the shade of a low tree, his bandaged leg resting gently on the ground. His mane, though still ragged, looked cleaner. His wounds were healing. When his eyes met hers across the fence, something shifted in his posture. Slowly he stepped forward, not with fear or confusion but recognition. A low, rumbling growl escaped his throat, deep but gentle. Elna stepped close to the fence, her weathered hand reaching through the gap. "You remember me, don't you?" she whispered. Kumo didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned slightly toward her, pressing his scarred head against the wire. She touched the matted fur just above his brow, tears quietly slipping down her cheeks. In that stillness, surrounded by the dry air and chirping birds, there was no need for words, only the shared understanding between two souls, both worn by time, both quietly grateful to have found each other in the twilight of their journeys. As Mrs. Elna stood beside the enclosure, gently brushing her hand across the steel fence one last time, the head ranger spoke with quiet respect. "Kumo won't return to the wild," he said. "His injuries, his age, he wouldn't survive. But don't worry. He'll live out the rest of his days here, safe, fed and watched over." Elna nodded slowly, emotion welling in her chest. At 72 she had often felt like the world had moved on without her. But standing there, looking into Kumo's tired yet trusting eyes, she realized something profound. Love and compassion don't age. They don't retire. They don't fade. In that moment she didn't feel old. She felt purposeful. She promised to return often, bringing Kumo the dried meat he loved, just like a friend visiting an old comrade. As she walked away from the enclosure, the lion let out a deep, quiet sigh, one that mirrored the peaceful smile forming on her lips. In today's fast-moving world, we often forget that kindness is not measured by speed, strength, or youth, it's measured by heart. Mrs. Elna's story reminds us that no matter our age or circumstances, we still have the power to save, to care, and to connect. Sometimes saving just one life, even a forgotten king, is more than enough. She stepped into her truck, glanced once more at Kumo resting beneath the sun, and whispered, "Rest easy, old king. You're home now."